So, imagine a country where women are, well, statistically expected to stay in school longer than men.
Right.
A country where the national parliament is split exactly 50-50, half men, half women.
Which is pretty rare globally.
Yeah, incredibly rare. And they sit comfortably in the top tier for gender equality, like number 13 in the entire world.
It sounds like a Scandinavian utopia, honestly.
It really does. But then imagine that exact same country dropping a staggering 97 places in global human development rankings, the absolute second you factor in its impact on the Earth.
Yeah, that is the catch.
Today, we're doing a deep dive into what might be the ultimate human development paradox, and that is the United Arab Emirates.
It is such a fascinating contradiction. I mean, we are looking at this incredible 30-year data set today, basically spanning from 1990 all the way to 2023.
And we have this incredibly stark presentation to guide us through it.
Yes, exactly. The goal today is to deconstruct how a nation engineers what, on paper looks like a total social and educational miracle. And then, crucially, we have to look at the invisible ecological debt that bankrolled that exact miracle.
Right, because the source material we're looking at today, it's this incredibly rigorous academic presentation. And I want to set the scene for you listening because the design of this deck is so intentional.
It's very striking.
It really is. It's pure minimalist. There are no distracting backgrounds, just pure white, like hex code, FFFFFF.
There's 3D graphics, no drop shadows.
None of that corporate PowerPoint fluff. Just deep gray and navy text with these very deliberate pops of color like a Klein blue or brick red, just to highlight the data.
It forces you to look at the math.
Exactly. And slide one is just a massive hook. It lists those stats I just mentioned, the 50% parliament, the education numbers. But then right in the middle, in bold red text, it asks the big question.
Why does their ranking instantly plummet 97 places when you adjust for planetary pressures?
Yeah, and there's just this giant red downward arrow pointing to a negative 97. It completely subverts your expectations.
It really sets the stage. Because when you look at the baseline numbers on slide 2, the UAE pulled off a massive leap in a very short time.
Right, the Human Development Index, or HDI.
Exactly. In 1990, their HDI was sitting at 0.713. By 2023, it rocketed up to 0.940.
Which places them 15th globally, right?
Yeah, 15th. They officially crossed the threshold into the absolute upper echelon of what the UN considers very high human development. And the slide shows this with just a simple, smooth trend line. No clutter, just a node at 1990, a node at 2023, and a smooth arrow pointing up.
But to really understand the velocity of that leap, we should probably quickly clarify what the HDI is actually measuring for anyone who might be rusty on their macroeconomics.
Sure. So before 1990, economists mostly judged a country's progress just by its gross domestic product. If GDP went up, the country was developing.
Just raw money.
Right. But the HDI, which was developed by Mahbub ul Haq and Amartya Sen, they argued that human progress can't just be reduced to the amount of cash circulating in an economy.
It's the difference between a country being rich and a country being actually livable.
Precisely. It's a composite index.
Right.
So it definitely includes wealth, like gross national income per capita, but it forces that economic data to sit right alongside life expectancy at birth and access to education.
Okay, so moving from 0.713 to 0.940 in 3 decades means they didn't just hoard capital, they actually rewired the baseline capabilities of their population.
Exactly.
But, let's play devil's advocate for a second, because it's very easy for someone listening to hear this rapid development curve in the Middle East and just say, well, obviously.
It's the oil argument.
Yeah. They sit on some of the largest proven hydrocarbon reserves on the planet. They pumped an ocean of oil, sold it, and basically bought a first world society. Case closed.
It's the most common assumption.
But throwing money at a country doesn't automatically buy you gender parity, right? It's kind of like pouring premium gas into a car with no steering wheel. You just crash faster.
That's a great analogy. Economists actually call it the resource curse.
Right. There are plenty of resource-rich nations where the money just gets siphoned off by a tiny elite. The infrastructure rots, and female literacy stays completely stagnant. Pumping oil doesn't just magically build hospitals that women can access.
No, it certainly doesn't.
So how did the UAE steer this wealth?
Well, the mechanism they used is what political scientists call the rentier state model, but they executed it with an intense, almost obsessive focus on modernization.
Okay, break that down for us.
So in a classic rentier state, the government gets pretty much all its income from external rent, in this case, exporting oil. They aren't taxing their citizens to fund the government.
Right.
And because citizens aren't taxed, that traditional democratic social contract, no taxation without representation, it gets flipped.
Oh, interesting.
The state provides this massive cradle-to-grave welfare system.
Yeah.
Free healthcare, free education, guaranteed public sector jobs, zero income tax. And in exchange, they expect political loyalty and social stability.
Okay, so the oil wealth is just the fuel, but the deliberate policy to build that social infrastructure, that's the steering wheel.
Exactly. And to see how well they steered, you just have to look at slide 3, which covers the Gender Development Index, or GDI.
This is the minimalist dashboard slide, right?
Yeah, it just shows 3 dimensions side by side: lifespan, education, and income. And it shows that by 2023, their GDI hit 0.957, putting them in the very high Group 2 category globally.
Which means they basically closed the gender gap in basic human capabilities.
They did. But to really grasp how structural that change is, you have to look at where human development actually starts. Because it doesn't start in a boardroom. It starts with physical survival.
Right. Which brings us to slide 5. And honestly, this was the most staggering data set in the entire analysis for me.
The maternal and youth health data.
Yes. The protection of young women's lives. The slide uses this really stark downward area chart, like a waterfall dropping off a cliff. When you look at the 1990 data, the adolescent birth rate, which tracks births per 1,000 women between 15 and 19, it was at 51.02.
So out of every 1,000 teenage girls, over 50 were having babies.
Right. But by 2023, that number cratered to just 3.10.
That's a reduction of over 93%.
In a single generation. And right next to that, the maternal mortality ratio, women dying from pregnancy complications, that dropped from 21.2 down to 9.34.
Which means they fundamentally secured a young woman's right to survive.
Ooh, but how does that actually happen on the ground? Because you can't just pass a law mandating that teenagers stop having babies.
No, you can't mandate it, but you can completely change the economic and social incentives that drive early marriage.
Okay, how so?
Well, it's tied to hyperurbanization. The UAE transitioned from this largely nomadic, pearl-diving society into a massive metropolis very quickly. The state built out a world-class healthcare apparatus. But building hospitals is only half of it.
Right, what's the other half?
Access and culture. The state aggressively promoted higher education as a marker of national prestige. And at the same time, because maternal and infant healthcare became so good, families realized they didn't need to have 7 or 8 children just to guarantee a few would survive to adulthood.
Oh, wow. Yeah, that makes sense.
Child mortality drops, family sizes shrink, and the age of first marriage naturally gets pushed back.
So it creates this protective buffer. Thousands of young women who, back in 1990, would have been pulled out of middle school to manage a house and raise kids, they're suddenly insulated from that pressure.
Exactly. The healthcare system basically bought them time.
And they took that time and just flooded the education system.
They absolutely did.
Yeah.
Which leads us to slide 4, and this is arguably the most fascinating demographic anomaly we have, the education reversal.
Yes, the double line chart.
Right. So we measure this using expected years of schooling. It's a projection of how many years a kid entering the system today will likely complete.
And the visual here is great. Pure white background with a bright Klein blue line for females and a dark gray line for males. And back in 1990, both lines are super low.
Yeah, expectations were low across the board. For females, it was 10.58 years. For males, even lower at 9.08 years. Basically, dropping out of high school was totally normal.
But then both lines trend up through the 90s and early 2000s.
Right, as the public school system expands. But then we hit this crazy historical node.
The crossover point. The slide literally has a red dashed circle drawn around the 2014 to 2015 window.
Yes. That is where the blue female line violently crosses over the gray male line and just accelerates upward.
And by 2023, the expected years of schooling for a woman in the UAE hits 16.07 years.
Which equates to finishing high school and getting a full 4-year university degree.
While the male line, which did improve, is lagging behind at 15.27 years, women officially and undeniably outpaced men in the classroom.
And we see that in the older demographic, too. The mean years of schooling, actual time spent in a classroom by adults over 25, women went from averaging 5.89 years in 1990 to 12.83 years in 2023.
They went from basically a 5th grade education to holding college degrees. But wait, this raises a huge sociological question.
Why are the women out-educating the men?
Exactly, because usually in deeply traditional patriarchal societies, families prioritize educational investment for their sons, not their daughters. So why the flip?
It is super unique, and it's heavily tied to the structure of the Gulf economy. You see, young Emirati men have historically had access to really lucrative, very socially prestigious career paths that do not require a university degree.
Like what?
The military, the police force are stepping right into established family trading businesses.
Hmm.
The state guarantees public sector employment, so for a long time, a guy could get a very comfortable, high-paying government job with just a high school diploma.
So the men had this massive economic safety net. It basically disincentivized spending 4 extra years grinding in a university library.
Right. But for young Emirati women, the calculus was completely different. Higher education became this culturally sanctioned, highly respected space for a woman to be in before she got married.
It's seen as a safe environment.
Exactly. And because women faced way higher barriers to entering the private sector or starting businesses due to traditional gender roles, a university degree became the absolute mandatory passport if they wanted a respected role in the workforce.
So education wasn't just about learning for them. It was literally their only legitimate mechanism for upward mobility.
Yes. The state created this environment where getting a degree was culturally acceptable and economically necessary for women.
Which inadvertently created a whole generation of highly educated, hyper-ambitious female graduates.
Exactly.
But okay, here is the friction point. You have this massive pipeline of women stepping off campus with degrees in engineering and finance and law. But the society they're stepping into is still fundamentally traditional, right?
Very much so.
The private sector doesn't just naturally open its doors and hand over leadership roles just because the graduation stats look good.
No, organic cultural shifts like that usually take generations. You have to battle entrenched biases, rewrite corporate policies, change how society views a working mother. It's incredibly slow.
But the UAE leadership didn't want to wait generations, which brings us to slide 6 and their strategy of top-down empowerment.
This is a masterclass in brute force policy design.
It really is. The slide uses a step chart to show the percentage of parliamentary seats held by women, and the timeline is just wild.
From 1990 all the way to 2005, what was the number?
0, literal total exclusion from the national legislative body.
Right. Then in 2006, it bumps to 5%.
Yeah?
By 2007, it hits 22.5%, and it just flatlines there for over a decade.
Which, 22.5% is respectable. It was basically on par with the U.S. Congress around that time. But it's not equality.
Not at all.
But then, in 2019, there's this massive vertical arrow on the chart. The line doesn't just trend up, it rockets straight to exactly 50.0%.
Half the national parliament, literally overnight. And it stayed there through 2023.
Ow.
This is what we call state feminism in the Gulf.
Yeah.
This was not a grassroots suffragette movement winning over voters district by district over 30 years.
Right.
It was an autocratic legislative fiat. The leadership just decreed it. They established a mandatory quota. 50% of the Federal National Council must be female. Done.
It's so crazy to think about. It's literally like installing a new operating system on a computer. You don't wait for the machine to slowly learn the new code. You just force the update, reboot, and the whole interface is different.
That's a perfect metaphor because top-down quotas bypass all that messy, slow cultural evolution.
But why do it? Why force it so aggressively?
2 main reasons. First, national branding.
Right.
The UAE wants to be seen globally as a modern, progressive hub to attract foreign investment and talent. Hitting #1 in regional gender parity looks amazing on a brochure.
Right, the global prestige factor.
And second, it's just macroeconomics.
Yeah.
The leadership knew they had spent billions educating this massive demographic of women. Keeping them out of governance and out of the workforce is just an unbelievable waste of human capital, especially when you're trying to diversify your economy away from oil.
And we definitely see that economic activation on slide 7. The labor force data.
Your tornado chart.
Yeah, it's a great visual. You have the male participation rate on the right, which stays pretty static, hovering around 90%. But on the left, the female bar just keeps growing.
Right. The female labor force participation rate was just 31.33% back in 1995, less than a third.
And by 2023?
It climbed to 54.48%.
Yeah.
That is a jump of over 23 percentage points.
So if you zoom out and look at the macro result of all this,
Yeah.
surviving childhood, dominating higher education, entering the workforce, and being legislated into political power, it totally collapsed their gender inequality index, the GII.
Which is shown on slide 9 with that really elegant slope graph.
Yeah, just 2 points connected by a thick line. In 1995, their GII was 0.764. They were ranked 104th in the world.
Lagging behind a lot of developing nations.
But by 2023, the line drops all the way down to a GII of 0.040. They jumped 91 spots, right up to 13th globally. They basically skipped a century of slow-burn progress and just teleported into the top tier of gender-equal countries.
It is an empirical triumph of top-down policy, assuming you have the resources to back it up.
Oh, but this is a massive, massive but.
Here we go.
The limitation of top-down policy is that it only works on things the state directly controls, right? You can mandate a parliament seat, you can build a school, but you cannot pass a law that instantly forces thousands of private sector companies to change how they value and pay human beings.
Which brings us to the elephant in the room on slide 8.
The persistent income gap.
Exactly.
The visual here is this huge, unbalanced scale graphic. It completely shatters the illusion of a flawless utopia. Because when you look at the 2023 gross national income per capita, the female average is $39,171.
Which, to be fair, is a very solid middle to high income globally.
It is. But then you look at the male demographic. The average for men in 2023 was $89,116.
Men are earning roughly 2.27 times more than women.
It's a staggering gap, especially in a society where the women are statistically more educated.
It demands a really deep structural analysis.
Well, before we even get into the gender dynamics of the modern gap, I have to ask you about this wild historical anomaly in the data, because I saw this and couldn't figure it out.
The 1995 number.
Yes. In 1995, the female GNI was around $29,000. But the male GNI back then was astronomical. It was over $135,000.
Right.
So over 30 years, female income went up a bit, but average male income basically plummeted from $135K down to $89K. How does a booming, expanding economy see a $46,000 drop in per capita male income?
Okay, this is where we have to talk about the kafala system. You absolutely cannot analyze economic data in the Gulf without understanding the demographic reality.
Which is?
Roughly 88% of the UAE's population are not citizens. They are expatriate workers.
Wait, 88%?
Yes. Almost 9 out of 10 people in the country are foreign workers.
That is wild. Let that sink in for you listening. 9 out of 10.
Right. So back in 1995, the total population was relatively small, maybe 2.5 million. The oil wealth was heavily concentrated among the local citizens and a small pool of skilled expats. That drove the male average through the roof.
Okay, so what changed?
The physical infrastructure boom. To build the hyper-modern Dubai you see today, the Burj Khalifa, the Palm Islands, the mega highways, they needed an army of labor.
So they imported millions of workers.
Exactly, primarily from South Asia, India, Pakistan, Bangladesh. And they brought them in under the kafala or sponsorship system, which ties a worker's visa directly to their employer.
And I'm guessing this labor force was mostly men.
Overwhelmingly male
Mm-hmm.
and heavily concentrated in low-wage sectors like construction and basic services. So the population explodes from 2.5 million to nearly 10 million today.
Oh, I see the math now.
Right. When you calculate the macro male GNI per capita today, you're blending the incomes of immensely wealthy Emirati citizens with millions of blue-collar migrant men who are earning a fraction of that.
That massive demographic dilution drags the whole male average down.
Exactly.
Okay, that makes perfect mathematical sense. But here's the thing. Even with millions of low-wage male workers dragging the male average down, the men as a whole are still making 2.27 times more than the women.
Yeah, the gap is incredibly stubborn.
So what is the systemic friction keeping women from accessing that capital?
The friction comes from 2 main sources: occupational segregation and the glass ceiling.
Okay, let's start with occupational segregation.
So even with a university degree, cultural norms in the UAE often steer Emirati women toward specific sectors: education, healthcare, public administration.
Right, traditionally female-coded jobs.
Exactly. They're vital, respected fields. They have family-friendly hours and great maternity policies, but inherently, they pay less than the dominant sectors of the Gulf economy, like oil and gas, finance, heavy engineering, which are heavily, stubbornly male-dominated.
It's the classic care penalty. Society just refuses to financially value the work it deems appropriate for women, no matter how essential it is.
Yes. And the second issue is the glass ceiling in the private sector. Women are entering the workforce, right? They hit that 54% participation rate. They're getting entry-level and middle management jobs.
But they aren't making it to the top.
Exactly. The climb to the C-suite, becoming a CEO, a partner at a law firm, it's incredibly fraught. Corporate culture, informal networking, implicit biases, they still heavily favor men for executive roles.
Because, again, you can mandate a 50% quota in parliament because the government literally owns the parliament.
Right.
But you can't just pass a law demanding every private bank in Dubai promotes a female CEO. Breaking entrenched private sector culture is a glacial process compared to writing a law.
And this inequality isn't just, a moral failing. It's actually a mathematical drag on the nation's overall development.
Which brings us to slide 10 and the inequality adjusted HDI, or IHDI.
Right, the overlapping bar chart.
Yeah, it shows the big HDI bar and then a slightly shorter, darker bar over it, with the missing gap highlighted in a dashed box. Explain how this penalty works.
So the traditional HDI looks at national averages, but averages hide disparities. If one guy has $1 million and 9 guys have zero, the average is still $100,000. But the reality on the ground is severe inequality.
Right.
So the UN created the IHDI. It takes your high HDI score and penalizes it based on how unevenly those achievements are distributed across the population.
Okay, so for the UAE in 2023, their base HDI was 0.940. What was the adjusted score?
It dropped to 0.866.
Which, looking at the slide, equates to a 7.8% loss. Almost 8% of the country's potential human development is just evaporating because wealth and education aren't distributed equitably.
It's a really sobering reality check on the whole miracle narrative. It shows the absolute limit of the rentier-state model. The government can hand out basic services, but true equity requires democratizing access to private capital, and that threatens the established power hierarchies.
Okay, so we've traced this incredible social miracle. We've seen the 30-year climb, the triumph of female education, the legislative shockwave in Parliament. And we've acknowledged the stubborn economic realities. It's complex, it's flawed, but it is undeniably an upward human story.
It is. But now we have to pivot.
Yes. We have to address the massive, brutal paradox that we promised you at the very beginning of this deep dive.
It is time to look at the environmental bill for this 30-year miracle.
Because when the UN measures human progress, they recently realized they were missing a huge piece of the puzzle. The traditional HDI rewards a country for generating wealth and building hospitals, but it completely ignores how they generated that wealth.
Exactly. If a nation clear-cuts all its ancient forests, brings mountains of coal, and drains its aquifers dry just to build state-of-the-art schools, its HDI score will still skyrocket.
The index cheers on the human outcome while just turning a blind eye to the ecological devastation left behind.
It's like evaluating a company's financial health by only looking at its gross revenue and completely ignoring the fact that they took on billions in high-interest debt to get there.
Eventually, the debt comes due.
Always. So to fix this fatal flaw, the UN introduced a brand new metric, the PHDI, or the Planetary Pressures Adjusted Human Development Index.
And this is where we get to slide 11. The visual here is just ominous. It's pure white, but there's this giant black downward staircase, and next to it, just a massive -97.
Yeah, the data goes into absolute freefall here.
How exactly does the PHDI penalize a country?
It takes that high HDI score and discounts it based on two strict environmental metrics: carbon dioxide emissions per capita and material footprint per capita.
And when you apply that planetary penalty to the UAE, their stellar 0.940 score violently shrinks down to just 0.585.
Which is shown perfectly on slide 14, the dumbbell plot. It shows the two dots connected by a line and a big downward arc arrow labeled -37.7%.
Over a third of their progress is just wiped out because it was achieved at the expense of the Earth.
And the global ranking consequence is exactly what was teased on slide 1. When you rank all 166 measured countries by this adjusted metric, the UAE plummets exactly 97 places.
They drop from being 15th in the world, part of the absolute global elite, all the way down into the lower half of the rankings. They end up performing worse than many developing nations that have a fraction of their wealth.
We really need to unpack the culprits driving this massive penalty.
Let's do it. Slide 12 looks at carbon emissions. It's a lollipop chart comparing the UAE to a horizontal dashed line representing the global average.
So in 2023, the UAE's carbon dioxide emissions from production were roughly 24.1 tons per capita.
And looking at the historical data, this isn't just a recent spike because they built a new factory or something.
No, it's a deeply entrenched baseline. Back in 1990, it was over 27 tons. For more than 3 decades, they have consistently operated at over 20 tons of carbon emitted per person every single year.
To give you listening some context, the global average for carbon emissions right now is roughly 4 to 5 tons per person.
So the UAE is operating at around 5 times the planetary average.
That's intense. But the carbon footprint is only half the penalty. The metric that truly broke my brain when I was reading this is on slide 13, the material footprint.
Ah, yes.
The visual is this minimalist pictogram made of these heavy gray geometric blocks stacking up. What exactly does material footprint measure?
It's a comprehensive measure of the total amount of raw physical materials extracted from the earth to meet a country's final consumption demands.
Like what?
We're talking about the physical weight of biomass, fossil fuels, metal ores, and non-metallic minerals. Like the sand and gravel used to pour concrete.
Okay, so in 2023, the UAE's material footprint was an almost incomprehensible 39.76 tons per capita.
Almost 40 tons.
Let me repeat that for you because it's hard to visualize. Almost 40 tons of physical earth is extracted, processed, and consumed to support the lifestyle of every single person in the UAE every single year.
It is a level of resource extraction that the planet simply cannot sustain if other countries try to replicate it.
Okay, wait. Let me step in and play devil's advocate here again.
Go for it.
Because it is very easy for analysts sitting in, temperate climates with abundant rainfall to point fingers at the Middle East for high energy and material consumption. Let's look at the physical geography of the UAE.
It's extreme.
It is a desert. It is one of the most arid, geographically hostile environments for dense human settlement on the planet. They have practically zero fresh surface water.
Yeah.
If they don't use massive amounts of energy to run industrial-scale desalination plants, their population will literally die of thirst in a matter of days. They don't have arable land to grow wheat or raise cattle, so they have to import the vast majority of their food via energy-intensive global supply chains. Furthermore, summer temperatures frequently exceed 115 degrees Fahrenheit. Running air conditioning isn't a luxury. It is a mandatory prerequisite for biological survival.
Right.
So isn't a sky-high material and energy footprint simply the non-negotiable entry fee for existing in that geography? You can't exactly collect rainwater in Abu Dhabi.
Your geographic defense is fundamentally valid, and it provides really crucial context. You're absolutely correct that geography dictates a higher baseline of energy and material consumption. You cannot sustain a population of 10 million people in the Rum Al Khali Desert using the same resource footprint as a village in rural France. The baseline for survival is undeniably higher.
Right.
However, we have to look closely at the scale of that 40-ton material footprint. Because desalination, importing food staples, and basic residential cooling, that only accounts for a portion of it.
What's the rest?
An extraction rate of nearly 40 tons per person goes far, far beyond baseline geographical survival. It points to a hyper-consumerist, extreme growth economic model that relies on conspicuous consumption and relentless, unchecked expansion.
Okay, yeah. We are talking about building indoor ski slopes with real snow inside a shopping mall in the middle of a desert.
Exactly. We are talking about dredging millions of tons of sand from the ocean floor to build massive artificial luxury islands in the shape of palm trees.
Right.
We're talking about sprawling, low-density suburban developments that mandate heavy automobile use rather than dense, shade-oriented urban planning. We're talking about skyscrapers encased entirely in glass, which basically turns the building to a giant greenhouse, requiring astronomical amounts of energy to artificially cool the interior.
It's almost antagonistic to the environment.
And fundamentally, we are talking about an economy built on the extraction, refining, and global export of the very fossil fuels driving the climate crisis.
It is the ultimate manifestation of the brown economy.
Yes. The 30-year miracle of their human development, the schools, the maternal wards, the universities that empowered a whole generation of women, it was entirely subsidized by this brown economy.
The extreme resource consumption created the vast pools of wealth, and that wealth funded the social progress.
Which makes this a truly agonizing, almost tragic paradox.
Yeah, the very economic mechanism that saved thousands of young women's lives, reduced teenage pregnancies, and put women in parliament is the exact same mechanism that is accelerating a global climate crisis that disproportionately threatens the future of those exact same women.
It forces us to synthesize everything we've learned today into a cohesive understanding of what the UAE represents.
Which brings us to the final slide, slide 15, the conclusion. It's a simple grid of 3 minimalist icons: a scale, a coin, and the earth.
Let's hit the scale first. The UAE is a paradigm of top-down equality. They proved definitively that if an authoritarian state possesses the political will and the financial resources, it can use top-down design to rapidly erase gender gaps in education and political representation.
Right. They proved it doesn't have to take a century of slow cultural evolution to get women into government.
But then you have the coin icon.
Yeah.
The economic reality. The stubborn, deeply entrenched income gap proves that while you can force equality in public office overnight, deep structural culture is way harder to dismantle.
The occupational segregation, the patriarchal norms of the private sector, the corporate glass ceiling. You can change the laws, you can change the hardware, but the cultural software takes a long time to rewrite.
Exactly. And finally, the Earth icon.
Huh.
The 97-place plunge in the planetary index presents an existential survival challenge.
Yeah, transitioning from a high extraction, fossil fuel dependent brown economy to a sustainable, renewable green economy isn't just some altruistic feel good environmental goal for the UAE.
No, it is a matter of absolute national security. Because if the planet overheats, if global sea levels rise to the point where they threaten low-lying coastal megacities like Dubai and Abu Dhabi, if the regional temperatures exceed the limits of human survivability,
Then having a near perfect human development score won't mean a thing.
the ecological debt will eventually bankrupt the social progress. The final takeaway on the slide says it best. The next 30 years of the UAE's development cannot be about flying higher. It has to be about stopping the Earth from overloading.
So, we started this deep dive looking at a diagnostic dashboard of a nation. We saw these brilliant, glowing indicators for health, for female education, for parliamentary parity. A genuine, undeniable triumph of rapid human empowerment that changed millions of lives for the better.
But then we looked at the environmental gauges, and they were flashing red, warning of a catastrophic system failure.
The dashboard is explicitly telling us that the engine that powers the vehicle is running so hot that it is literally melting the chassis.
And if they don't fundamentally change the fuel source and the design of the engine, the entire vehicle will be lost.
Which leaves us with a final, lingering thought for you to mull over as you go about your week. Think about the metrics we use to judge success, both in our own lives and in the world around us. If a nation achieves a near-perfect score in human development, if it educates its citizens, protects its mothers, and closes its gender gaps, but it does so by borrowing so heavily against the Earth's carrying capacity that it actively threatens the survival of future generations. Can we truly call that society developed? Or is our very definition of human progress fundamentally broken if it doesn't include the survival of the planet it happens on?